The Oak Ridge Homeowners Association was less a community organization and more an autocracy. Their rules changed with the seasons. Their fines felt like hammer blows, and their power went unchecked. At first, I ignored their petty regulations. What did it matter if my hedge was an inch too tall or if a few leaves dusted my driveway? But the moment they threatened my livelihood, the fight became personal. It started with an envelope, thick and imposing. Inside was a letter riddled with legal jargon, but the message was clear. Mr. Calloway, you have accrued $3,257 in HOA fines. Payment is due within 30 days. Failure to comply will result in immediate legal action. The alleged violations? Laughable. A wooden bird feeder that disrupted the neighborhood's uniform aesthetic. A garden hedge slightly taller than their arbitrary standard. A few scattered leaves that had blown onto my driveway overnight. I had heard of HOA horror stories, but this was extortion. I tossed the letter aside, unwilling to bow to their demands. But the second notice came with more than just threats. It bore a legal petition. The HOA had somehow maneuvered through a loophole, filing for a lien against my property. If I didn't pay, they could initiate foreclosure. Worse yet, they sought access to my personal bank account under an obscure clause about debt recovery enforcement. Panic simmered beneath my anger. Losing my home over nonsense regulations was unfathomable. I needed to act, determined not to be bullied. I spoke to my neighbors. Some were indifferent, conditioned to obey. Others, however, had their own grievances. Maria, a single mother, had been fined for leaving her car in her own driveway overnight. Mr. Henshaw, a retired veteran, had been forced to uproot his vegetable garden because it didn't fit the HOA's aesthetic. I called a meeting. A quiet rebellion sparked in my garage, where those of us who had suffered under the HOA's iron grip finally voiced our frustrations. They fined me $200 because my porch light was too warm-toned, said Linda, her voice shaking with restrained fury. They sent me a warning about my holiday decorations being too exuberant, muttered Greg, arms crossed. The stories piled up, each one revealing the HOA for what it truly was, a profit machine disguised as a governing body. With mounting frustration, we formed a plan. I contacted Helena Croft, a lawyer renowned for taking down corrupt HOAs. She reviewed my case, shaking her head. They have no right to seize your bank account, but they'll drag this through the courts, hoping you'll cave. We need leverage. Leverage. The word hung in the air, a promise of something greater. As I mulled over my next move, I realized the answer wasn't just in the legal fight. It was in the very thing the HOA sought to control, our environment, and I was about to give it back to nature. The first step was gathering evidence. Helena instructed us to document every unjust fine, every underhanded move the HOA had made. We compiled photographs, recorded conversations, and dug into the association's financials. What we found was worse than expected. The board had been siphoning off our funds, to line their own pockets. Lavish dinners, personal vacations, and maintenance fees that never resulted in actual work. Armed with evidence, we filed a formal complaint with the county. But while the legal process churned forward, I had another plan in motion, one the HOA would never see coming. For years, the board had insisted on an unnatural, meticulously controlled landscape. They outlawed native plants, demanding chemical-laden lawns and sterile flower beds. Their irrigation systems drained the soil, leaving it dependent on constant watering. But nature has a way of reclaiming what's hers. Under the cover of darkness, I began sowing the seeds of change, literally. I scattered native wildflower seeds along property edges, knowing they would take root faster than the HOA could notice. With the help of Maria's son, a biology student, we introduced beneficial insects into the ecosystem, ones that would naturally counteract the pesticide the HOA had insisted upon. But the real stroke of genius came from Mr. Henshaw. He had spent years studying soil health and knew exactly what the HOA's artificial landscaping lacked. Together, we discreetly enriched the soil in neglected areas, ensuring the HOA's chemically dependent plants would struggle while native growth flourished. It started small, tiny patches of untamed green emerging from the edges of pristine lawns. At first, The HOA dismissed it as minor overgrowth, but within weeks, the landscape had begun to shift. The overly watered grass weakened, giving way to resilient native plants. Flowers bloomed where none should have. The manicured perfection the HOA so desperately clung to was unraveling. As the legal case heated up, so did nature's quiet rebellion. The board doubled down on enforcement, issuing citations left and right. But something had changed. Homeowners who once feared the HOA's wrath now saw an opportunity. Inspired by the pockets of natural beauty emerging around them, they began pushing back. Some stopped using HOA-mandated pesticides. Others refused to cut their wildflowers. Slowly, the neighborhood transformed. And then the storm hit. The storm arrived like an omen, rolling in with heavy winds and torrential rain. It battered Oak Ridge for 2 full days, overwhelming the HOA's irrigation systems and exposing the fragility of their artificial landscape. The chemically treated grass turned to slush, while native plants, strengthened by deep roots, remained standing. Then the real disaster struck. The drainage system, another cost-cutting scheme by the HOA, failed catastrophically. Water pooled in the streets, flooding pristine lawns and seeping into basements. The HOA board, desperate to maintain order, sent out frantic messages demanding compliance with emergency regulations. But the community had reached its breaking point. No one listened. Homeowners who had once feared retaliation now saw the HOA for what it was: powerless. The rebellion that had begun with quiet defiance erupted into full-scale resistance. With the help of the evidence we had gathered, Helena filed a lawsuit exposing the HOA's financial mismanagement. News of the scandal spread fast, attracting local media attention. Reporters descended upon Oak Ridge, eager to expose the corruption at the heart of our so-called exclusive neighborhood. Then came the final blow. The county intervened. With overwhelming proof of fraud and negligence, the HOA's leadership was dismantled. The board members, who had ruled with unchecked authority, were now facing lawsuits of their own. Then came the final triumph. Without the HOA's oppressive rule, Oak Ridge thrived. Residents replaced artificial lawns with native gardens. Birds and butterflies returned, and the soil healed. What was once a neighborhood controlled by greed had transformed into a true community, one where nature, not bureaucracy, dictated the rules. And as I stood on my porch, watching wildflowers bloom where sterile grass once suffocated the earth, I knew that nature had taken its revenge. With the HOA dismantled and its corrupt leaders facing legal consequences, Oak Ridge finally breathed free. Gone were the arbitrary fines, the oppressive rules, and the sterile landscapes that once defined the neighborhood. In their place, a new sense of community flourished, one built on cooperation rather than control. Without the HOA's interference, homeowners embraced the natural beauty that had been fighting to reclaim its place. Wildflowers blanketed yards, native trees took root, and butterflies danced through the air. What had started as an act of quiet defiance had transformed the entire landscape into something thriving and alive. As for me, I no longer lived under the shadow of manufactured perfection. My home was no longer just a house, but a sanctuary, one that I had fought for, one that nature had reclaimed. The HOA had tried to seize my personal account, but in the end, they lost everything. Their greed had been their downfall, and nature had ensured their defeat. Standing on my porch, I watched the sun set over a neighborhood reborn. The fight had been long, but justice had prevailed. And in the end, it wasn't just about winning. It was about proving that when people stand together, even the most oppressive forces can be toppled. Nature had taken its revenge, and we were all the better for it.